We'll turn the broadcast on now, so we are live streaming. Thank you, all three of you, for coming this afternoon to give us evidence for our inquiry. We appreciate it very much. Before we start, just to get you on record, if you don't mind from my left saying who you are, and if you represent any organization, please feel free to do so. And if any of you, after you introduce yourself, want to make any opening statements, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we'll move on to the questions. Please.
Thank you very much. Tom Nelson, Director of Forensic Services at the Scottish Police Authority.
Stan Brown, Chief Executive, Forensic Science Northern Ireland and Executive Agency of the Department of Justice.
Anthony Harbinson, Director of Safer Communities for the Northern Ireland Department of Justice, and I'm responsible for the forensics policy within Northern Ireland.
Thank you very much. Do any of you want to make any statement, or shall I go on to questions?
I think we're happy just to jump into the questions.
Okay, good. So am I. So let me kick off first. So we are told that the forensic science is arranged significantly differently in Scotland and Northern Ireland compared to England and Wales, and that the way it uses forensic science and the way it is used in criminal justice system is different. So would each of you tell us briefly how is it different from England and Wales?
Maybe I'll start off then by saying that in Northern Ireland we have one key provider of forensic services, and that is the Forensic Services Northern Ireland Agency that Stan is the Chief Executive of. Within that agency we offer a range of specialised services, but it is a public service body that works directly for the range of criminal justice agencies within Northern Ireland, most predominantly the Police Service of Northern Ireland, but also the Prosecution Service, the Court Services, the Police Ombudsman, etc. Anything that we can't provide internally ourselves, we then broker to the commercial world and see where we can buy the services in from that. But the key element is an internally driven, public sector driven forensic science agency.
In Scotland, it is obviously very different to England and Wales. In 2007, we established the National Forensic Science Service, which was one of the first national services from crime scene through to court. So we covered fingerprints, scene examination, and all the laboratory services. So in 2007, we brought together 4 laboratories, 8 scenes of crime departments, and also the Scottish Fingerprint Service. Prior to 2007, they were all line managed by effectively the local chief constable. However, in 2007, the decision was taken to bring that all together into one national organisation. The reason behind that was that science does not begin in the laboratory. Science actually begins at the crime scene, and therefore it's important to make sure we have the right processes and practices and standards in place from the very, very outset. So we have all that organisation under one quality management system. It provides a one-stop shop to Police Scotland, the Crown Office, and PERC, the Investigation Review Commission, and it provides that service to the whole of Scotland from those 4 primary sites, 4 laboratories, and 13 other scenes of crime departments. What that allows us to do is to maximise the forensic recovery at the crime scene, and then get the most out of that evidence whenever it comes back into the laboratory. One of the key reasons for the establishment of the National Service and bringing it out of the arena of the police environment was to ensure our independence, and also then to provide that sterile corridor which effectively allows us to provide that impartial forensic science service to the criminal justice system in Scotland. So we have a very different approach to the delivery of forensic science in Scotland compared obviously to England and Wales.
Okay. Lord Fox and Lord Griffiths.
I can see how this works for the prosecution. I'm interested how it works for the defence, because if I want independent analysis of forensic information in your domains, where do I go? Do I go to England or what?
Well, I think the first thing to notice is that people are not prosecution witnesses.
But you're commissioned normally by the police service in order to gather and analyse the data.
But we analyse it totally objectively and take huge measures to do that. And our expert witnesses, when they give witness to the court, have a sole duty to serve the court and not to those instructing them or paying them. We take that extremely seriously, and all our quality management system enhances that. In addition to that, we support a defence expert should they wish to look further as an extra layer of protection for the
So how often would a defence use a service other than yours in order to respond?
It happens most in major cases, but you would have defence solicitors engaging with us. Sorry? No, in serious cases, it can happen quite often. And we facilitate the defence fully, not as adversarial, but as partners in trying to get the objective truth. I think that's extremely important, that objectivity of science. If science isn't objective, it's not science. That's the bottom line.
Can I just ask a question? Are you saying that you treat both the prosecution and the defence? You're providing a service to them, and you treat them absolutely equally.
Yes.
So if I was a defendant, I would not feel in any way I had less access to you than the police.
Yes, I think
one of the benefits we actually can deliver is the exoneration of the innocent. So that is one of our strengths. And in fact, we have just gone through a development of a strategy in forensic science in Scotland, and the staff are really keen that was paramount, that we not only are involved in obviously criminal justice and prosecution, but actually what is our strength is we actually can provide that evidence which actually exonerates the innocent as well. And very like Northern Ireland, we have an access policy which allows defence agents to come in and obviously engage with our staff.
Thank you. Lord Hunt.
That was very interesting and encouraging from your statement, but with previous witnesses and discussion, there's been the thought that the progress to having a sort of more objective prosecution defence examination is relatively recent, and certainly when I asked the PQ about this nearly 10 years ago, it was very clear that there was not an equal look at it, and the judges then were not, as it were, calling on the science from the prosecution and the defence side, and I think one of the members of our committee, who's not here today, a judge, did comment that there really had been quite a change. I wonder whether you'd like to comment on that, as to whether there is now a cleaner approach.
I think historically we've always taken that approach. It's not a new thing. Science is inquisitorial, but it's inhabiting an adversarial world of justice. So we have to act inquisitorially and not biased. So, for example, if the police were not submitting what we thought was a necessary exhibit in order to fully round out the analysis or examination, we would push back and say we also want that, that and that. If that was refused, we would take a note of that, and that goes into our case assessment, which then forms part of the final report. So you can capture that aspect. It's our duty to ensure, as Tom was saying, that exculpatory evidence is completely exposed just as much as other evidence. And just like the Public Prosecution Service in Northern Ireland has an obligation to ensure a fair trial, our obligation is to ensure science in support of a fair trial.
But you seem to be saying, therefore, there's been no change in general policy.
No change in policy.
Other witnesses have been saying there really has been a change.
In Northern Ireland, because we've had a divided society for quite a long time, we've always had the approach that our forensic science and our judicial system is completely and utterly independent, and we've always worked straight on that basis.
Point taken. Thank you.
Baroness Neville-Jones.
This is I think a very important point to the committee about the access that defence has. And I want to be quite clear about what I'm hearing. Are you, as a practical matter, does the defence come to you as often as, say, you service the prosecution? And how does it work? If you, in the course of your work on the forensic evidence that's available, and you come across exculpatory aspects, do you take the initiative to inform the defence?
Yes,
you do.
Not only
not just the court, but the defence as well.
And not only in in live cases, if we came across an historical error that only emerged sometime afterwards, we would inform the Public Prosecution Service, who would review historical cases, no matter how many years that was in the past. And if it was of a generic nature, we would inform the Forensic Science Regulator. The defence solicitors would have access to our laboratory, and we have a disclosure team which gives them full disclosure, and if they wish, they can bring in experts to supervise our work, to examine the
And do
work.
they avail themselves of that
Yes,
right?
they do, yes.
They do?
Yes.
In Scotland, we have a system of precognition prior to, obviously, the defence expert coming in. So the defence expert can precognose the scientists who are involved in the case and ask them any questions that they would want in relation to a specific case. And then, obviously, if they then want to come in, arrangements can be made for further examinations to take place, or questions to be developed further. So certainly there's a process in place, and if we ever did come across anything which obviously would exonerate any individual through our quality management system, we would make that available and known to the appropriate bodies, including the regulator.
I think there's a rather philosophical point. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
The reason I think some of us are asking these questions is that we had a previous witness who was, I think, a very credible witness from a scientific point of view, who ran a company, and he said that over a long period of time, I can't remember the exact amount of time, but a substantial period of time, he had something like 300 and something requests by the prosecution. And again, my memory may be wrong, but I think it was 4, but it was certainly less than 10 over that period of time. And the question then is, from your perspective in Northern Ireland and in Scotland, do you feel there is something, because of the structure of our system, which leads to a bias which you have corrected because of the structure of your system?
I don't know the English system well enough to make any comment on that aspect of it. What I can say is that in the Northern
Ireland,
the Northern Ireland system has always tried to work on a basis of complete and utter independence and complete openness and transparency in everything we do going forward. I think that is easier done when you have the core of your services being provided by a single public sector body, rather than a range of smaller companies that may or may not. Because at least in Northern Ireland, the defence, both solicitors and barristers, know how the system works. They know what they can get, they know where to get it, they know who to speak to. So it's not a problem for them in any way, shape or form. But I would always point out that in Northern Ireland, and to a degree in Scotland, we have one police service, we have one prosecution service. We're small enough to know everything and everyone within that system.
That's a
Lord Fox.
helpful cue, because just to be clear, in the English and Welsh situation, the police have retained quite a lot of the forensic capability. So in Northern Ireland, Scotland, the police have zero forensic capability, and it is all external to the police.
I can say for Northern Ireland that the PSNI are located about 80 yards away from us in the same complex. They have the Fingerprint Bureau. They do the matching of fingerprints. We do specialist fingerprint recovery and imaging, which we then send to them. They do the matching. We do the DNA databasing and most of the advanced science with advanced laboratory facilities and expertise at scenes. They do footwear screening, so they would screen multiple possibilities of footwear, and we would then do the matching of that. So there's no overlap as such, but there's some dovetailing between what they do and what we do. They do cybercrime, and we have a digital forensics unit. So there's
I was going to ask about that later. But
Sorry, in Scotland, therefore, it is different in that we have a national forensic science service which does sit outside policing. So therefore, the crime scene examiners, the fingerprint department, and all the laboratory functions are within my remit as Director of Forensic Services in Scotland. The only area which is out with that remit at this moment in time is digital forensics.
So do you charge?
It's digital forensics.
Do you charge both prosecution and defence for your services?
So our budget is the Scottish Police Service Authority is the board that I report to, and the Scottish Police Service Authority are given the budget by Scottish Government, and then they allocate that budget to the Chief Constable for policing, for the Scottish Police Authority, for the corporate services and for forensic services in relation to our service provision. So our budget is effectively top slice from the overall policing budget.
Our funding is different. We are funded through service level agreements, the biggest one being with the FSNI, but we also have them with the State Pathologist and with the Police Ombudsman, and we do some work for the National Crime Agency and the HMRC as well. So we charge as a cost recovery, and then if the defence uses solicitor, we charge the solicitors and they recover that from legal aid.
A quick one.
That was the question I wanted to ask you. Is there is a transaction charge, is there?
Yes.
And is that applied to both sides, prosecution and defence?
We have a. Sorry, I should have mentioned we have a service level agreement with the Public Prosecution Service, so they pay us an annual fee as well. The purpose of the charging is to try to right-size demand versus capacity. It's not that they have control over us; they don't have any control whatsoever over casework. It's just a question of right-sizing the organisation.
Lord Hunt.
So, my question here is, what do you see as the main benefits of the system as it works in your two nations? And in a way, you've been addressing that question. I was going to just add a sort of a kind of a Brexit tweak about this. That I mean, there is of course another country adjacent to you which speaks English, and and I just wondered, and you have a sort of no border effectively.
Yep.
Would you like to comment upon how this fits into the question?
Give me the first question first.
So the advantages from our point of view are numerous. First of all, as Anthony expressed, there's a adversarial background to justice in Northern Ireland. Therefore, it's very important we are demonstrably objective, independent, especially when we look at legacy inquests going back to the times of the Troubles and the possible establishment of an historical investigations unit. It's hugely important that we're seen to be completely objective from the police and do our thing in our way scientifically with no holds barred as regards that. The other advantage, and Anthony will probably blush at this, is that we have access then to capital investment, strategic capital investment. So we've recently completed a new laboratory costing £14 million, which is probably one of the finest in the world in terms of its facilities for DNA and trace evidence. That's funded by the Department of Justice. Whereas a private organisation would have to fund their capital expenditure and then get a return on that investment over a period of time. Also, on an annual basis, we have investment in advanced instruments. So advanced chemistry analytical instrumentation can cost £250,000 for one mass spectrometer, for example. So we might have £2 or £3 million worth of kit in one particular laboratory room. So that's very, very important. The ability to have the best science and the best facilities is critically important, together with the objectivity and demonstrable independence.
I should say that Stan has painted a very rosy side of the picture as well.
Times are tight too.
There is also the issue that there will always be tensions between the service provider and the purchaser, and the main purchaser being the Police Service of Northern Ireland, who wants more, wants it quicker, wants it cheaper. There is always those tensions, but that's why we have it on a semi-commercialised basis, with the forensics agency selling the services through a service level agreement to the PSNI, making sure that they get what they pay for.
I think in terms of Scotland, obviously we have tremendous facilities. We've got 4 laboratories. 2 of them are very new, built in the last 6 years. We've got the Scottish Crime Campus at Gartcosh, and again significant millions upon millions of pounds went into those facilities. We do have amazing equipment, and that allows us therefore to bring the best science, and my aim as director is to make sure that Scottish policing and the Scottish public have access to the best science on every occasion. In fact, we did some work looking at our values, and our value and vision is for scientific excellence for safer communities. So we see ourselves wanting to make sure we are providing the best equipment, the best facilities to obviously support the public and the people of Scotland, and the Scottish Government have supported us in that. And I think one of the reasons why we have had that support over the years is because they see a real value in forensic science. And I think one of the disappointing things is that quite often people don't see that value, and therefore they don't invest and don't want to invest. And to me, forensic science can add significant value to the public in making our communities safer, and also supporting the criminal justice system as a whole.
Can you answer my second
The
part of my
second
question?
part of the question.
Do you mind repeating it, please? If you would?
Do you have any relationship with
Oh, yes.
Ireland?
Well, both Tom's organisation and mine and the four major commercial providers in England and Wales and Ireland form part of the Association of Forensic Science Providers, which works so extremely well considering there's a mixture of public and private organisations. We help each other in qualities rows and all sorts of things. So I know the Irish laboratory well. Ireland has made the decision recently to more or less follow the Scottish model. So it's absorbing that part of forensics which was with the police, then Garda Síochána in the Republic, and absorbing it into an independent forensic organisation.
Okay. Can you answer two quick questions? One, are you both in Northern Ireland and Scotland accredited?
Yes. Yes.
Who accredits you?
One of the broadest ranges of accreditation in Europe, possibly.
And what standards do you use?
ISO 17025.
You have no problems with these ISO standards?
Well, to say there's no problems, it is fit for purpose, it's rigorous, it's demanding, but if you're genuinely committed to quality, you should not have an issue with it.
Okay. And what is your budget, both in Scotland and Northern Ireland, for this service?
Our budget is about roughly 11-12 million pounds.
So I cover the whole range of scene examination, fingerprints, laboratories across the whole of Scotland. So our budget is just around about £30 million.
Good. Thank you very much. Vance Neville-Jones.
I think my question is largely directed at Northern Ireland. The Forensic Sciences Group and the board and the operations group have, as far as I can see in their regime, a commitment of the following: provide a layer of governance supporting and facilitating collaboration between stakeholders. Can you unpick that sentence a little bit and just say, who are regarded as the stakeholders and what is really meant by layer of governance? I think it's probably implicit in a lot of things you've been saying, but it'd be interesting to know exactly what the purpose of that commitment is and how you find it works in practice. I mean, do you think this is a good approach? I take it you do.
Yes.
Are there any limitations to it?
Sorry, I'll take ones. We've had, we have a criminal justice inspection facility within Northern Ireland that goes around looking at different areas of the criminal justice system and also does thematic issues. In 2014, they did a review of forensics and basically said that we needed a forensic service strategy that encompassed everything that Stan's organisation was doing in forensic science Northern Ireland, but also the other forensics elements that the police would buy in directly from other areas, services that Stan's team don't provide. To make sure that we had a complete map of what it was used for, how it was used, where it was going, and also to cover areas like the public prosecution service and how it fits into the court service. So I commissioned a forensic service strategy to pull that together. And out of
who
that,
did that for you, if I might ask?
My own team did that together. We brought in a specific Peter Gillese to lead on it, to develop it and to take it forward. He worked with a small team and we took that together forward. The biggest recommendations out of it was that we created two groups: a strategic leadership group that was made up of senior leaders within the criminal justice agencies like the police, like the prosecution service, etc., and forensics, and that we create an operational group that would sit onto that and actually work out the day-to-day issues of how specimens would transfer between issues, how we would look at it. There was tensions between the budget, how much we were spending, how much the police were getting. The police would always want more for less. It's a common factor. But STAM has to maintain a threshold of expertise, a number of staff in each area. He has to keep the science accredited and keep it high, so there is additional add-on cost. Plus we do research and development as well, to a degree. So we set up these two operational boards and then the strategic board. The strategic board I initially chaired myself, but I thought that since I was from the department, it would be better if we had someone more independent actually taking that forward. And we asked a retired judge, Judge Tom Burgess, to actually take on the role. He did. So he is now the chairman of the Forensic Science Leadership Board. His independence and his impact with the judiciary as well has also been very insightful in taking it forward. The Strategic Leadership Board reports to the Criminal Justice Board in Northern Ireland, which is the head of all of the criminal justice organisations together. So what we were building was a matrix of organisations and structures to make sure that we were doing the right things in the right way. And at the top level of each of those agencies, there was a realisation that forensics was important, what its role was, where it needed to be, and also the resourcing of that, so that we would actually maintain and stabilise the sources that we had, because we were conscious that in this jurisdiction the public service laboratory had collapsed and hadn't succeeded, and we wanted to make sure that ours did going forward. So we set it up on those bases. We set a range of key issues that we wanted those groups to actually take forward. We particularly wanted them to begin a project measuring the value of forensic science, actually understanding the importance of forensic science and what value it gives, not the cost, but actually the value. We wanted to look, as Tom had mentioned, about the, as I would describe it, the end-to-end process from the scene of crime right the way through to the court, and the impacts that would have, and try and look to see how we could make it more effective, more efficient. And we also wanted to develop a gateway project which would actually encourage better communication between the criminal justice organisations and the defence, to make sure that we had a better understanding of what we were doing at each and every stage.
Who exactly is the we in that? I mean, that's a very interesting process, and it'd be interesting to know what do you think it's delivered by way, I hope, of improvement, and who is the we?
The we actually was the Criminal Justice Board, which is made up of obviously the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Justice, the Minister, but also the Chief Constable, the Director of Public Prosecution, the Lord Chief Justice, and a range of other criminal justice bodies.
And what have been your conclusions as a result of this process you've set up? Have you seen results of a kind, assessments of a kind that actually has changed how you do things?
Yes, we have. We've been going for about a year now in full mode. We've set up those 3 projects I've described to actually understand and look at it. We've seen benefits in terms of how we interact. Stan will be able to give you the details of it. In terms of funding, has become a lot better. We've moved from annual funding in terms of policing to a 3-year funding model. So there's a much better understanding. There's a lot less friction between the police and forensics in terms of why are you not doing this sample now? Why is my case falling behind? There's a better understanding of the process and where it is and how we can take that through. But
I should also add to that, we're helping it understand where forensics injects value into the crime scene to court system. So at an early stage it might inject value into speeding up the investigation. Eliminating suspects at an early stage saves the police money and having to go down nugatory lines of inquiry, for example. If forensics can support an early guilty plea, you avoid a trial, which saves money. If the forensics is fast enough, you don't have to have repeat remand hearings where they held in remand pending a further outcome. So it's understanding how it injects value into the end-to-end process and applying a lot of logic to that, the just-in-timeness, if you like, of forensic science. I think the other thing, beneath the Forensic Science Leadership Board and the operational group, which looks at a range of different projects, beneath that there's a joint research and development called the Forensic FSOG, Forensic Service Operational Group. Then there's FSL, lost it. Joint Innovation Delivery Group, that's right. Too many acronyms in Northern Ireland, or NI as we call it. So we work with the police to try to identify needs for research and development, that their needs that we might be able to contribute to scientifically, and what we're doing scientifically that might be of benefit to them, and try to prioritise that.
Chairman, might I ask just one more follow-up question? One of the things we've heard in previous evidence sessions is that quite a lot of the turnaround time, in getting a piece of forensic assessment back has been long. Do you have any statistics on typical turnaround times? Yes,
we do. It depends on how you prioritise the work. So you can have a case can attract a priority, or work within a case can attract a priority. So in the case of, let's say, a stranger rape, we would maybe turn around DNA in 24 hours. Right? The average for DNA in total might be 12 days. the mean average for all cases might be, say, 35 days, but some of them will be much longer than that, depending how complex they are. Because in forensics, the evidence, you might have lots of exhibits, and they bifurcate and split into multiple streams and are recombined and then evaluated into a series of reports coming over a period of time.
Maybe if I give you from a non-scientific point of view, Northern Ireland has a problem with the length of time our criminal justice system takes to process cases.
Yeah.
Part of the work that we were doing here was trying to actually speed up, and I am responsible for the speeding up justice agenda in Northern Ireland as well. And what we've been trying to do is move to proportionate forensics reporting, where we're reporting on the things that are in contention rather than everything, and everything at a gold standard level, so that where there is no objection by the defence, we can move things quicker and more forward, and then people can focus on the bits that are a matter of contention and take those forward. So we're trying to find ways to use forensics not as a delay, but actually in speeding up the whole justice system and going forward.
And who would establish that the defence had no objection?
Well, that's where it comes into, we still have committal, and we go in and it would be discussed, and that would be the role of the judge and the judiciary to find out what is at contention and what is not.
We'd also be very transparent if it was an interim report, a proportionate report, which hadn't got the full evaluative package behind it. We would be clear about that in writing it up, and we'd make sure that too much weight was not put on the evidence at that stage when it was only sort of interim results.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Baroness Young and then Baroness... Baroness Morgan, then Baroness Young.
Thank you, Chairman. A very little question, actually, to follow up to Mr. Brown, if I can. The logic of saying early spend is a good investment. It seems very clear. But have you actually got stats on that? I mean, do you actually financially measure and prove that?
That is one of the...
And if so, can we have it?
It's one of the projects in the Forensic Services strategy is to do that, and Alfie perhaps could speak about work at the University of Ulster on that.
We're working, as I said, to actually understand the value of forensic science, and we've commissioned the University of Ulster to work specifically with us to take that project forward. And I would hope... We've done the academic research element to it, and we found that there's basically no research previously done in this area. So we're looking to take this forward as a piece of groundbreaking work, and I know both the Home Office and the England Wales system are interested in what we're doing and are keeping an eye on it, as is Tom's.
Okay, thank you.
I think one of the value questions is quite often we can add value in intelligence.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes very, very hard to measure that.
Yeah.
And certainly in Scotland, with the Scottish Crime Campus, what we have found is we've been able to work with Police Scotland, particularly around the serious and organised crime groupings, and begin to add some significant value in those cases. It's very, very hard to measure that, but certainly we're looking at value in Scotland, because obviously everyone is up against tight budgets, but we want to demonstrate that actually investing in forensic science leads to better outcomes at the end of the day. And we're also working with Stan on that project as well in relation to...
This is more of an aspiration than having solid data.
But the data is being...
It's being amassed at this point.
It's being amassed right now. They're working out the model of how they measure some non-monetary things like societal benefit and so on, and how they measure advantages in the process of the justice system, cost avoidance or whatever it happens to be. So any trial that's avoided, for example, saves a lot of money.
And what's the timescale on this research?
It's probably got another 12 to 18 months to go in that sense. But I think Tom is absolutely right. We shouldn't underestimate the impact that forensic science has on intelligence-led policing and also on counter-terrorism, particularly in Northern Ireland as well.
Okay, Baroness Young.
We came to Scotland because your governance structure is different and doesn't appear to be as well plumbed into the judicial side of things as Northern Ireland. I mean,
Sure.
Do you think that's a drawback, or does it work in some other way?
I don't think it is. Obviously, the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act brought in the Scottish Police Authority, and that was established with the single police force in Scotland at that time. And the Scottish Police Authority Board is there to hold the Chief Constable to account in terms of policing, but also I report directly to that board as well. So I obviously report to the Scottish Police Authority on forensic science and forensic science issues. Beneath that board, in terms of our governance, we have a forensic science committee, and that committee is chaired by one of the board members along with 2 to 3 other board members on that particular committee. Now, represented on that committee are Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service, Police Scotland, and some other agencies as well. And those meetings are held, as well as the board meetings, are held in public as well. So there's plenty of scrutiny and oversight of the delivery of forensic science in Scotland. We're also very much aligned to the justice outcomes, and there's a justice board in Scotland of which we are contribute to, and a number of the working groups, and we're working together to obviously try to improve the whole end-to-end justice process for obviously the victims of crime.
So you've not been tempted to add a judicial representative to your oversight board?
Obviously, this is a fairly new committee which was established following an HMICS inspection about a year ago. So the committee's been running for about a year, and obviously the remit and the membership is always under review, and obviously we would probably consider that moving forward. But at this moment in time, the judiciary aren't members, no.
So if I were a lawyer for the defence, or indeed a defendant, would I worry a bit that your committee was a creature of the police system?
I don't think you need to be, because we are open, we are transparent, and we are obviously there to serve the criminal justice process, not prosecution.
But at the end of the day, you get sacked by somebody who's in the police system.
I wouldn't get sacked by anyone in the police because I don't report to the police. We're separate. The Scottish Police Authority Board ensures that sterile corridor between ourselves in terms of scientific investigation and the police investigation. So it is separate.
Lord Hunt.
Can I just ask, when you're collecting data, do you have common data availability across the 4 countries, all the countries of the UK?
No, I think the data picture at the moment is very, very poor. There's lots of anecdotal information on how valuable forensics is, but there's not enough quantifiable data.
Really?
Yes.
So if you find somebody who's accused, and that person has moved around the 4 countries, or however many,
the difficulty is how do you measure how much impact forensics had on a particular stage in the process? How influential was it in an early guilty plea, for example? How do you measure that is going to be the hard part.
I think Lord Hunt's asking a slightly different question, Stan, in terms of there is a common DNA database, there is common fingerprints, there is common, so yes, you're right, there are common systems that we feed into and feed up to, but there are common systems.
A national DNA database,
There's a what?
a national DNA
National
database,
yes, right.
of which all the countries participate in, and there's also a national fingerprint database as well.
So it's just fingerprint and DNA, is it?
But I should say we have...
I mean, for example, behaviour patterns could be monitored.
There's no consistent database across the UK.
No. The DNA database, we run the Northern Ireland DNA database, and Scotland have their own, and we both feed into the national DNA database to the same standards. So they're interchangeable standards.
Thank you.
Is there any link with the rest of Europe?
We're both members of the European Network of Forensic Science Institutes, so there's a lot of linkage between our laboratories and over 60 laboratories across Europe with specialist working groups. That plays a big role in the standardisation of best practice across Europe. But we also share DNA through Interpol or PRUM or Europol, so DNA profiles can be shared between countries.
Okay.
Do you know what's going to happen to that post-Brexit?
We understand that will continue. That's my understanding at the moment.
It's certainly part of the withdrawal agreement is that we would keep access to those systems, but obviously that's all part of negotiation.
Really? Not part of the future arrangement. Thank you.
Okay. Lord Renfrew.
Thank you. Turning to the market of forensic sciences in England and Wales, we've heard that the scale of the market has in practice declined from 170 million perhaps to 50 million over 10 years, and we've had reservations from providers about the sustainability of the market. So it'd be very interesting to hear your views on that system in England and Wales, and what will be the impact or the consequences on admissibility of evidence, reliability and credibility of forensic science evidence.
Well, I think... Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
I think there's no doubt that the market isn't sustainable. And if you look as far back as a report that was done in 2008, the McKinsey report, it predicted what would happen to forensic science if it went down a particular route. It predicted what would happen to the market, and all its predictions have effectively come true. It would risk compromising the impartiality of forensic science. It would increase the screening of items, therefore reducing the number of tests that are done. It reduces the size of the market due to insourcing. It's unclear how innovation and productivity improvements would be incentivised. And all these things were predicted effectively in 2008. And to me, the way the market is at the moment, it's not sustainable. And there's a significant risk there unless we take some action.
And could you say a little more about the consequences for justice since that time in England and Wales?
Well, I think we already have seen a number of companies actually going bust during that time. And in fact, in January, February of this year, again, another company went into, I believe, liquidation. That put a significant strain on the provision of forensic science services. I think people are leaving the organisation because they see no value. It's not being understood, it's not being appreciated, and therefore they're leaving the organisation. And I think there's a significant risk in England and Wales if someone doesn't waken up and take some decisive action to change that situation.
And do you feel that's likely to have a greater impact from upon the defence as compared to the prosecution in the English and Wales system?
I think if companies go bust, obviously, I know even today we're being asked by other forces in England and Wales, could we do some work for them? So obviously there is a risk there to the marketplace. Therefore, it isn't sustainable in the long term.
I think the issue is forensic science is an added value technical service into another person's, another organisation's business process. Normally in any other walk of life, price wouldn't be the driver. It would be the quality and value that you're generating for your customer in a win-win situation. If you treat it as a commodity and you're procuring on price alone, you drive down the costs. And it's very difficult for a commercial provider to maintain their long-term investment in staff and in capital equipment if they haven't got surety of income and profitability going forward. Now, we work with the commercial providers with great respect for them. They are very committed to quality. Their quality ethos is as good as ours, but they are suffering. There's no question they are suffering because of the spiralling down costs and loss of profitability, and the lack of investment then in research and development and other things. Where we have, so in any particular time or specialism, insufficient capacity in Northern Ireland, we would wish to broker to an English provider, and that's not there. So, for example, in toxicology, following the RTS debacle, our prices in the Randox Toxicology Services in Manchester, there's 11,000 cases compromised and are being re-examined. The price of forensic toxicology to us has more or less doubled as we try to access that extra market. So we're all influenced by that, and also the health of us working together collaboratively on research, on, say, transfer and persistence and things like that, and quality. We all work together in that. That's compromised, potentially, with the loss of key players with a long experience and tradition in forensic science.
Lord Griffiths and then Lord Fox.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Nelson a question. You mentioned the report by McKinsey and so on, and you said that they predicted more than 10 years ago, or 10 years ago, that there would be this problem in a market solution.
Yes.
And can I just ask you, was it, because over that period in England and Wales, certainly we've seen a very significant budget cut, roughly by 50%, which is huge in terms of the market. Was the argument of McKinsey that there was something intrinsic in a market in forensic science services, or was it looking forward and saying, if you have cuts on this sort of scale and the spiralling down, as Mr. Brown said, then you're in trouble? Because they are quite two different
they are. I think there's two issues there. Obviously, if you're under cost pressure and you've got the budget, then you're going to look at where you're spending your money. Now, if that has been done in an environment where people don't see the value that forensic science is bringing, then they're going to reduce the number of tests that are being done. And I suppose whenever I read the forensic strategy for England and Wales, what did concern me was it seemed to be driven by the driving down of costs, and therefore, obviously, to me, that means that the market is going to collapse even further. and they're losing the value question, and they're not seeing that.
I think the other point to note is that each forensic laboratory, a sizable one, will have a number of different specialisms. There's a minimum size, an irreducible size for each specialism, below which it's not sustainable. You've got to have peer review of every report, for example. Therefore, they would have to make a decision at a certain point, we'll discontinue this specialism. Now, to rekindle a specialism from scratch would take 3 years, because you've got to get the people, you've got to train them up to their official competence, you've got to validate your instruments and all that sort of stuff. So the flexibility of a forensic organisation to plan laterally, to load balance, is very difficult between different specialisms, or to plan forward. It needs a 3-year minimum horizon to do that. So in a commodity-based procurement approach, it's virtually impossible for them to do that.
Lord Fox and then Lord Mayor.
I think we've had a hint as to what would happen in England and Wales if one of these large private sector suppliers, or both, were to flounder. What would be the knock-on effect in your respective territories in the event that one or other or both of the big English and Welsh firms exited the market?
There'd probably be very little impact on the casework in Scotland, because within Scotland we provide that crime scene to court service, and therefore we have all the specialists, in fact even more, that's probably provided down south currently. So the impact to us in terms of service delivery wouldn't be the same, but obviously in terms of collaboration, in terms of the really positive working that we have within the Association of Forensic Science Providers in relation to quality and trials, that could potentially be lost and therefore be a real challenge.
It could also be a challenge for us in terms of, as Stan has said, the biggest thing is the accreditation of staff as you go through, and the training of staff. We had an early retirement package in Northern Ireland that saw a lot of our staff leave, and Stan had to retrain staff back up again to get them to the level. And during that period we were brokering out to external organisations, mainly based in this jurisdiction. If they weren't there, we would have a difficulty during those peaks and troughs, particularly in toxicology services, whereas probably we do most of our brokering.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to skills again in a minute, but yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please do.
On this subject?
Please do.
Can I ask you, over the last 10 years, if you look at Scotland, Northern Ireland, what is the percentage of your budget that has been devoted to buying in services from the market as opposed to providing them your in-house?
For myself, I'd say less than 10%, I'd guess.
And has it gone down over that period?
Toxicology has gone up because of the increasing demand for toxicology through drug-related deaths and so on. So toxicology is the most complicated of forensic sciences, and that's the one we're experiencing most difficulty with. When we didn't have some specialist DNA things, we brokered those to an English provider, but now we have brought most of those in-house.
Okay. Toxicology issues, is this poisoning?
Yes, well, not only poisoning, it can be drug abuse, it can be drugs used, a victim is affected by drugs, or a perpetrator is affected by drugs.
What was the one?
It can be a victim, can be affected by drug rape, for example. You might have that. So you might have victims affected by drugs, or drugs used in the perpetration of the crime, or it could be related to deaths, either suspicious deaths or unexplained deaths.
So it could also be due to lifestyle changes then?
Yes, but
Yes.
also it could be alcohol, doesn't need to be drugs. There's it's what was in the system of the perpetrator or the victim at a particular point.
Prescription drugs usually is.
In Scotland, a very, very, very small percentage of our work would be ever sent elsewhere. We are currently doing it at the moment because we're training. So we've been very fortunate, and now we've got an additional 21 biologists coming into the organisation, and to support that, we're using some scientific expertise down south to support that, and that's really probably all we've done.
Can I just ask you, could you put a number when you say very small?
Oh, less than 0.001% probably.
Right.
That's very small.
I think Neil would be closer. Lord Mayor.
I didn't want to say there was nothing.
Lord Mayor.
Can I ask about research? Where are the gaps in research and understanding of forensic science?
Perhaps I could start off with that one. Research in forensics is needed, I think, in 3 different areas. One is, how do you bring science more rapidly to the scene so you get answers more quickly? So something that will give you an identification within minutes or hours or something is potentially very, very helpful in terms of investigation. Then there's the research in what can be done within a laboratory to speed up the efficiency or effectiveness of the process, detecting things better, more sensitively, with more discriminating power, at lower cost and shorter time. The third one, which is quite different, is the research into the evaluative side of forensics. Forensics has two different concepts underpinning it: the source and the activity. So the source is, what is this material, right? How much of it is there? For example, identification of DNA profile or drug. The second question, the activity question, when and how did it get there, is a very, very, very different question. And that requires an understanding of the real world and what happens in the real world. How does DNA move from one position to another position, from one person to another person? And that's called transfer and persistence. So the Association of Forensic Science Providers has a beautifully named body fluid forum, which works together on that. And their job is to try to understand how likely transfer is of DNA and things between exhibits. That's hugely important. And that's why we have expert witnesses, highly skilled senior scientists who evaluate the evidence. It's not just a factual thing, they evaluate the meaning of the evidence for the court. And they look at the probability of finding the evidence they have found given what the prosecution say happened versus the probability of finding exactly the same evidence given what the defence say happened. So it's the converse of how the court works. It's the probability of the evidence given the proposition rather than the probability of the proposition given the evidence. So it's a fundamental difference in how science works.
So,
Did you want to come in? No.
It's a slightly different point for me.
Can I follow up, Chairman?
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to hear the Scottish.
Sure, yes. In Scotland, I would totally agree with Stan. Obviously, as we bring in new sciences, new, for instance, DNA technology, interpretation becomes key and paramount in that investigation. And therefore, I think there's a real opportunity for doing further enhancements and looking at persistence trials. So there's certainly some work that we can do in relation to research and development in that particular area, persistence trials. However, we also want to keep ahead of the game, and we want to bring the best science in. So I think there's real opportunity to see where the new science is coming and how we can bring that into a forensic environment. Now, in Scotland, we're very fortunate that we have the Scottish Institute of Policing Research, which brings the 13 Scottish universities together. I sit on the board of that research, and we obviously take on PhD, MSc projects over a given year, and that money comes from the Scottish Police Authority and from Police Scotland, and then obviously they go and look for grants from other research establishments. So we have CYPR, and we also have the Leverhulme Research Centre. So we work very closely with the Leverhulme Research Centre to identify where the new science is coming from and how we can bring that into the forensic environment. And the persistence trials are some of the activities we're taking forward with them.
Thank you. But as I understood from your written submission, that you're, despite what you've just said, that you said in that evidence that since the closure of the FSS, there's been very limited research right across the sector. Is that still
totally? You know, there was an awful lot more research going on then, so therefore, obviously, the research has been stifled because unless people can see a value in doing that research, obviously that research isn't going to go ahead. So the universities, and particularly obviously in Scotland, the Leverhulme Research Centre is filling that void effectively. But it's early days, and there is a lot of research we could be doing moving forward.
Okay, so I have lots of hands up. So to the point question, to the point answers. Lord Keika, Baroness Young, Lord Borick, and Lord Oxborough.
Lord Chairman, thank you. Just to come back to that point about stifling research, how do you think in a commercial marketplace one can achieve the same commitment to research and development that one was seeing before when there was a National Forensic Science Service?
Well, if you reward the provider for their effort and they get a return on that particular investment, then they have an incentive to do that research. In the case of a provider designing some new concept which might have intellectual property, you then would need a mechanism for them to license that property across the UK, so all the courts would benefit from it. You couldn't have it just isolated through one supplier. But you'd need to, usually that intellectual property would be co-created between perhaps academia, an equipment manufacturer and a provider working together to create an application. Because forensic science is applied science, it's not pure science. So it always comes down to how do you actually make it work
And is there a mechanism for achieving that kind of collaboration and securing the intellectual property at the moment?
There are potential ways to do that. There are standard ways of doing that through royalties and licensing, but the difficulty is that the commercial providers don't have the wherewithals to do the research because there's not enough funding or investment to make that happen.
Baroness Young.
Can I just go back to the Scottish system? Does what you describe capture two things? One is science from whatever discipline it's arising, not just forensic science research. And the other one is it sufficiently blue sky to anticipate what changes there might be in crime or society or science that you can get ahead of the game?
Sure. So the Scottish Institute of Policing Research, the science in it is primarily around evidence and evaluation. So it is very much forensic-led. The Leverhulme Research Centre, their money was obviously to support justice and the legal process, and also forensic science coming together for that conversation. So again, it's primarily around forensic science. However, what I would say, within Scotland, we have developed a role in our structure as a lead scientist. We see the lead scientist role as a role that can go out there and see what science is coming next, and can we bring that into Scotland. So this is a specific role that we have in different disciplines, and those people, their main goal is to let me and my organisation know basically what is coming down the road here, and how can we bring some of that new science into forensic science.
I mean, the point I would make is research is international. It's not just within these islands. There's a wider basis there, and certainly on the Northern Ireland side, we tend to focus on the development of that rather than the pure research itself. It's about, as Tom's saying, how you can use it and how you can take it forward.
I think that's quite correct. And most of the instrumentation that we use, for example, is born in other parts of science. So if we use gas chromatograph mass spectrometers at £250 million each, they're not created for forensics, they're created for analytical chemistry, which is a much bigger market than forensics. We then have to adapt that instrument and validate it for use in forensics. So there's a lot of research worldwide on that. The other aspects are, we can't do it in isolation. Academia can't do it in isolation because it's an applied science. So it's a combination of academia, equipment providers and manufacturers, and forensic providers working together to define what is needed in terms of more rapid science or more effective science or more robust evidential science, and then designing a concept and a project around that and getting it funded.
Lord Borwick.
The large numbers of staff that you need to do this really complicated work, do you train them yourselves?
Yes.
So you've got a big enough training establishment?
There's training. We train ourselves, but there's lots of conferences our people go to, and there's specialist working groups they go to across Europe, in which they learn about best practice.
And do you headhunt from other parts of the country to come over to Northern Ireland, or is that functionally impossible?
It is difficult to get people, to be honest, to come to Northern Ireland if they're not originally from Northern Ireland. Some do, but obviously we tend to home grow as much as we possibly can. It's a cheaper and easier way. And the thing is, if you buy people in, they tend to move back out the next time a better offer comes along. So it is a difficult area for us.
We do recruit at a high educational qualification, so most of our people would all of our reporting scientists would have degrees, MScs or PhDs, and then there's 2 to 3 years further training to make them into forensic scientists after that.
There's also a lot of training is to obviously bring them into standard operating procedures that you're currently using. So there's at least 2 to 3 years in some of the disciplines to actually get them up to speed with obviously those specific standard operating procedures. So a lot of it is done in-house, but obviously we do obviously look externally for the likes of CPD training and CPC training as well.
Okay, Lord Oxborough, then Lord Fox.
A young person about to graduate in natural sciences comes to each of you separately and says, I'm thinking of making a career in forensic science. What would your responses be? Encouraging, discouraging? What would you say, each of you say?
Very much so encouraging. I've been in forensic science for 38 years. It's been the best time of my life, effectively. I've seen it change and grow over that period of time, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in science and the application of that science in a court environment to come along and test it and see what it's like. It's a wonderful career. Yes, the marketplace has reduced the number of scientists around the country, but certainly in Scotland, we're actually taking on more staff because although we hear that crime figures are obviously falling, we're actually doing more forensic science and getting more cases coming into our organisation. Why? Because we're adding value in some of the cases we weren't doing previously.
So you'll be encouraging to the
very much so.
Yeah.
And the Ireland would be the same?
We would encourage as well. We've recruited over 20 new staff in the last couple of years following the early severance scheme, and for the most part they love it. And interestingly, though it's not highly relevant, a large proportion are female.
Okay, a quick question, Lord Hunt.
Were these people recruited in response to an open advertisement?
Yes.
Yes.
I know what I pay them, so I would encourage my nieces and nephews to join.
Lord Hunt, quick question.
So the important area of crime, which is different, is crime within prisons.
Yes.
And there are quite a lot. I could imagine that there are special research or capability would be needed for that, and I just wondered whether you would comment on that.
Well, we've been talking to the Northern Ireland Prison Service about assisting in the control of drugs in prisons, for example, and they've been out and visited the laboratory, and we're hoping to put together some sort of programme to help that, because drugs are a major cause of crime, as you know, and recidivism with people that are incarcerated.
But major crime or death within a prison unexplained would be investigated by the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and their samples would go through the forensics as a normal.
It's the same service that we're investigating.
The same service, yes, exactly.
Okay. So but there's quite a lot of high technology is being used by people in prisons to
Yes,
to do mischief.
there is, and certainly I chair a new psychoactive substance working group, and we're working again with Dundee University to understand what drugs are present in prisons, which is quite an innovative way of looking at it, and obviously that's going to be reported back up through the appropriate channels.
Lord Fox.
I think the skills part has been somewhat preempted by Lord Borwick's intervention, but I do have a question around digital forensics, because you both kind of carved that out and I think said that the police forces in your respective areas are still covering that particular important and vastly expanding arena. So I wonder where you think ideally digital forensics should lie, how it can be tackled given the huge volumes of it that we're beginning to see, and also how the issue of proper controlled disclosure to the defence can be managed. And obviously we haven't got long, but I do think this is a very important arena.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is to make sure that they are accredited, because if they are accredited, then disclosure should be part of that.
But the police themselves are not accredited, are they?
No, yes, so therefore to me we must say that the minimum standard is to ensure that they have accreditation to carry out that work. If they have that, then disclosure should be part of that and will be part of that. Also, I wouldn't like to say, obviously, I know in Scotland where I would like it to go, but that is not my decision, obviously, and that will be for the Scottish Police Authority and the board and the Chief Constable to agree where ultimately digital forensics sits.
We do have a digital forensics unit, which is smaller than the police's one, but our speciality is in bespoke. When the mobile phone is damaged, the chip has been damaged, and we extract the chip and interrogate it directly. Or, and this is quite important, where we're getting multiple evidence from the device. You're looking for fingerprints and DNA and fibres and data, all from the device.
Yes, so you've got the device.
That has to be done in a controlled environment, suitable for DNA and everything else, in order to get the data. So you can't send it out to a commercial data provider who doesn't have those strict laboratory regimes. I think the other main point is that because of the quanta of data inside these devices, how do you know you've got it all? Because frequently what happens is the police might have a look at a phone, find nothing, send it to us, and we find more than they found, okay? Because we're using perhaps more advanced kit in some cases. Now, how do you know, how do you validate that you've got it all? Because if you don't know you've got it all, how do you know whether you've got the exculpatory bit or not?
Well, absolutely.
So that's part of the accreditation. Confidence that you've got it all, confidence that you have seen it all, as well as just extracted it, discovered the important bits, and then confidence that you've disclosed it all. So there's three stages in this.
But I do think we're moving into a different arena whereby police will be focusing much more on intelligence-led policing and using cyber and digital recovery for those sorts of techniques and preventing crime, and going forward and passing stuff on to Stan's area.
But that's a kind of blurred line,
prosecution
isn't it?
side. It is, but it's hand in glove. Both have to work together because there really is immediacy in terms of cybercrime where something is hacked, something is stopped, there's a denial of service. Those things are imminent and have to be done right away by policing. So I don't think you'll ever get to the stage where you could take all of that out of policing, but certainly the evidential recovery, the evidential delivery for prosecution is a different element, I think. So there is the two that will go together.
I think I agree completely with Anthony says, but it's important that if you're going to do early intelligential work, nothing you should do should compromise the evidential value later. So the evidential at the end must never be compromised.
But the evidential stuff wouldn't need to be accredited.
Yes, it should.
The intelligence would not need to be accredited,
not per se,
but the evidential would be, in your view.
As regards the chain of integrity coming through to the evidential, it would need to be.
Mr. Neville Jones.
One addendum to that set of issues. I mean, it looks like a very rapidly expanding area. My question to you is, do you anticipate a capacity problem?
Oh yes, most certainly. Artificial intelligence will absolutely be needed to interrogate these things. You need to validate the recovery mechanism, both the skills of the operator and the instruments and software used.
Any planning going on to?
I think the volumes that we in FSNI associate with, we don't need to do that yet, but the police, I think, will across the country will be looking at that as a huge issue.
There is an estimation now 50% of all crime is either cyber-enabled or delivered. So yes, we're moving into a different world. It's like the industrialisation. We're moving from where we are into a very different space.
Are we doing this development nationally, or each of the countries doing differently?
I think they do work together, but it is done obviously nationally. I know within Scotland, Police Scotland, in terms of the long-term strategy, digital is within that, and digital crimes within that, and also a budget allocated to that, so it is significant. So it is being addressed, but I don't know if it's been addressed nationally across the whole of the UK.
Well, there's National Cybercrime Centre, there is national bodies that are set up by police and counter-terrorism experts working on this area, so yes, there are national bodies there.
Yeah. Without being too semantic, we should...
There isn't a nationally funded programme, though.
I think there is nationally funded through those bodies, yes, there is. I think there's national money going in on those areas directly, and the police can tap into them as and when they need.
I see.
Yes.
We should differentiate between cybercrime and digital forensics.
Yes, exactly.
Not exactly the same thing.
Yes.
And there isn't a national on that element of it, so there's not.
Our time's up, but it's been a very interesting session, and thank you. We've learned a lot about the differences between England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. I'm not allowed to comment whether it's for the better or not, but